Welcome to the Elokus podcast. This is class number 15. And in the discourse, Chukas 5672. And I'm planning for this to be the last one in this discourse, which is the seventh discourse in the overall book, B'Shashek Dimu, 5672. Again, this is class number 15. And we're completing chapter 28 today. And with this, we complete the seventh discourse with God's help. Today's class, I'd like to dedicate to a dear friend, a holy Jew, an incredible, special person, a person who lit up the world with his music, Rabbi Avi Piamenta, who very shockingly and suddenly passed away today. And I was particularly involved with him in a project, very Mashiach project. Just yesterday and the day before, we Zoomed probably for 3 hours. So this is a total shock for me. I don't even know his Hebrew name, Ben, because on the websites that mentioned his passing, it doesn't say his name. So God does know. Let this be the schus for Rabbi Avi Piamenta, for his holy soul. And he should storm the heavens and with his powerful music and say Baruch haba Melech HaMashiach, and bring Mashiach, welcome down here to this world, in the literal sense. So this is for you, Avi. Actually, the content over here is how through tshuva, and Avi is a Baal tshuva, through tshuva you actually, especially such an energetic, fiery, deep tshuva like you saw in the Piamenta brothers, both of them. And they merited to always play music in front of the Rebbe. Like the pneumius, literally the what we're going to learn today about the red heifer and the paraduma is so connected to this powerful soul, and to their music and to their true. It's just unbelievable. So again, let this be to the schus of to the merit of his neshama. Okay, so yesterday we left off that he's beginning to interpret the questions in which he asked regarding the parsha of the red heifer. Number one, what does it say? God spoke, and then it says this is the law, the statute that God commanded. It should have said this is the statute that I commanded if God is the one speaking in first person. Second question was why is the red heifer done outside of all camps? Third question was, why is this mitzvah through Elazar, the assistant high priest, not the high priest himself? So he began to explain that in general, our service, our mitzvah observance, beginning with as being part of the human race and then being part, obviously, of the Jewish people, but is all to increase God's presence in the world. And he says, and that goes all the way back to the first story where God put Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve in Gan Eden, and in the Garden of Eden, and they had to work it and guard the garden. And the sages explain that that's to work it by observing the positive commandments of the Torah, and to guard the garden is by watching from the prohibitive commandments. And the Midrash says that it's through the service of the sacrifices. That's what they were supposed to be doing. And what would happen as a result of that? They would be enhancing the Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. They would be causing that garden to become more pleasurable, the garden to improve. So as we were explaining yesterday, that the deeper meaning of that is that the garden in general is a place where there is already divine revelation. That sets the Garden of Eden apart from the rest of the world. The world in general is a concealment on God. And that's why in creation it only uses the name of Elokim. Elokim is the God obscuring himself. However, in Gan Eden it says Vayita Hashem Elokim, that God Elokim is planted the Gan Eden. So even without Adam and Eve, there is already great godly revelation in Gan Eden. And he explained that the reason when it mentions Havaya, Yud Ke Vav Ke, it means that primarily that the Yud, which is the most dominant, it doesn't say it over here, but perhaps it's related to what we learned in Tanya this week or last week, that the first letter, I think it was this week, that the first letter of a word is always the most dominant letter of the word. every word, every letter is a different energy. So the most dominant. So in the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the most dominant feature or energy is the Yud, which is Chachma. Now, if you say that in Gan Eden, Hashem, God planted the garden with the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei, it means that the energies of Chachma, which is the highest of the 10 Sefirot, are pretty pronounced and revealed in Gan Eden. It's only that since it says Vayita, he planted, means there's a certain diminishment in that. It's not the fruit itself, it's the plantations that will lead to the fruit. How does the fruit come out? When Adam and Eve worked the gardens, so that's when they were meant to increase the great godly light. What that means is through the Torah and the mitzvot, he says we pump the flow of Chachma into Gan Eden, the power of Chachma. Now, since we learned earlier in the discourse that in Chachma there is the vessel of Chachma, then there is the lights of Chachma, and in the lights of Chachma itself there is a Roshem, there is a little trace, a little mark of the original Or Ein Sof that is even higher than the 10 Sefirot. That lofty level, that too is tapped through the service of Gan Eden. And as we can understand how, first of all, we increase the lights of Chachma. And then not only the lights of Chachma, but the supreme light of Chachma is increased through the general service of Torah. And what's the connection of serving of Torah and mitzvahs to increase? Because there are 620 commandments, with the rabbinic commandments, 613 plus 7, 620, 20 is Gematria Keter. So what this really means is we're pumping, we're drawing forth the infinite lights of Keser that are even higher than Chachma to flow through the 10 Sefirot into the garden, and therefore enhance the garden. And that's what we learned is in yesterday. And that applies to all service of God. However, as we mentioned in the last class, through the red heifer, the effects of this enhancement of the garden, of this pulling forth a deeper engagement and a revelation of God further into creation, is far more potent. And the reason generally for that is, and I'm going to lay just one premise or one foundation, is that what really gets God excited and engaged and involved and therefore investing himself more into creation is when things that are far from him come close to him. And that, because that's unexpected. The farther something is, the more blurred one's consciousness is, the more separated, the more disconnected one's consciousness is, and that turns to God. That is amusing. That is exciting, and that's the intention. So in general, the mitzvot therefore are given to us in the physical world. The physical world is the most ungodly conscious world. It's the most obscured world. And that's why we also said particularly the service of the sacrifice of the animals, because it's when within the physical world itself, when it's our animal consciousness, which naturally is animalistic, seeking its own selfish gratification. And when we can sacrifice that to God, in other words, when we take a human physical heart that is usually filled with animalistic instincts and turn that heart into a spiritual seeker, into a being that serves its creator and wants to engage with its creator, that gets God to become more infused in creation. However, what is the great thing about the red heifer is that by the red heifer, we're taking it to a much, much greater extreme. And that is that even a corrupted soul and even a corrupted, in other words, someone that entered into the realm of criminality, someone who has gone far. Now, it's one thing to be a physical being, it's a physical subject, a physical entity living in the physical world, which in general is desensitized or not feeling godliness. So to get a creature and a being like this engaged is exciting. But it's a whole different story when you have already a wayward creation, a creation that not only is he not sensitive or not tuned into godliness naturally, but has actually rebelled and has gone in the complete other direction. And when that creature does tshuva, that is like that energy, that stimulates, that triggers so high the satisfaction, the pleasure that it rings. the place where it reaches is much deeper in the infinite, in God's inner self, than where ordinary service of Torah and Mitzvot. And that's the chidush. That's the novelty of the red heifer. It's also a sacrifice, but it's a sacrifice that is not done in the inside of the sanctuary, which means it's part of the inner part of the world. It's a Jewish entity that you're just bringing closer. It's a Jewish animal. But it was outside of all camps. It's someone who has already fallen into impurity, into disconnect, into sinfulness. And from that very, very distant place, there is an awakening and a seeking to return. That's the power of tshuva. And that's what the red heifer is. And that's why it's also related to the purification of someone coming to a contamination with a dead body. Death is a result of complete disconnect from God. So the red heifer means that one has already become completely severed from God. So then there's no expectations for that entity to become reconnected. It can't. It's already severed. And yet, that's the amazing element of tshuva. You never give up on a soul. Even when it's dead already, it can resurrect. But that resurrection is so exciting that it engages on the highest level. And therefore, he's going to explain that as much as the karbanos, ordinary sacrifices, draw down a greater divine infusion into the world, the red heifer pulls from a much, much higher place. So let's read it. Achine paraduma, the red heifer, masel b'chutz dafka. Its work, all of its activities, whatever you're doing with it, is done outside. Means outside of the camps. So what he's going to explain what means outside. In Eksiv, it says in the verse, that a river goes out of Eden. And from there, the river, it's a verse in Genesis that describes when God made the garden. And then it says a river goes, and why is he talking about the garden? Is because when we say inside, the regular karbanot are done inside in the temple. Inside the temple is like inside the garden. Because where do you do sacrifices? Inside the temple. Where did Adam and Eve, where were they placed to do their sacrifices? Inside the Garden of Eden. That means that a replica of the Garden of Eden today, even though when we were banished from the Garden of Eden, however, the closest we can get to the Garden of Eden is to be in the temple. But that's inside the Garden of Eden. But then there is a river that goes out of the garden. And eventually it says it forks into 4 rivers. It uses a term, yipared, which means separates. Simply it means it forks, but the word pure, what that means is you're entering into a place that is completely disconnected from God. That means already into the realm of sin, the realm of darkness. Now, originally in the higher worlds, this represents a state of the 5 beasts of the chariot, which compared to Gan Eden, to the supernal level of the river and the Eden, although the beasts of the divine chariot are very, very holy, very, very connected. Yes, but that's relative. Compared to the river that's coming out of Eden, it is already a very reduced divine consciousness. Because we know that the angels that make up this chariot, they're already angels, they're creations. They're not part of God, they're already separated. Although all they can think of is being a chariot to God, and they're surrendered to him completely, but the very fact that they have a consciousness of self is already a degree of separation. That's why it says Misham Yipare. However, that's the beginning of the separation. But then there is a long evolution. From these 4 beasts, it evolves lower and lower until it becomes the 4 dark empires that dominate this world, who destroyed the temple and act to cover and deny God in this world. And these are the 4 main klipot that create the darkness of the long exile and all the non-godliness in this world. And where do they originate? They originate in these 4 beasts above. How can one come from the other? These are holy, because when you see a crack in a wall, the wall, it didn't begin as a huge It started off as a tiny little fissure. And then that tiny little disconnect grows and grows like a little cavity. A cavity in your tooth doesn't begin as a massive, you need a root canal. It starts off with a tiny little thing. It's just when it's not caught in time, it grows and it cracks and it becomes a greater cavity. So that is the same over here. The disconnect starts very subtly. And that's what he says over here. And then in a state of evolution, eventually these four beasts of the chariot, their energies, when they go down lower and lower and they go down the chain of evolution through the various different obscuring worlds, it eventually will become the four empires, the Roman Empire, which is at war with God, and then the Persian Empire and the Greek Empire, all these things that fought and had philosophies and ideologies of paganism and of all kinds of depraved lifestyles that were antithetical to holiness and godliness. Which is the idea of pleasure, which are the pleasure, because eventually this is what it's starting off as a river flowing from Eden. Eden is as he said, Chachma. Chachma is an incomprehensible pleasure. We said even in the Garden of Eden, there can't be such a pleasure. But then this pleasure flows, and it becomes the other forms of pleasures throughout creation. Eventually it becomes materialistic and even unholy pleasures in this world. Think about how much energy in this world, how much pursuit is there in this world for dark pleasures, for sinful pleasures, for it's pleasurable, but it's very, very unholy. So this is what he says. These are these powerful energies of pleasure that have gotten misguided, fallen into this world, become misconstrued, and so on and so forth, and then obviously lead to sin. And this is the idea of now taking this red heifer, shemasel b'chutz. So we're talking about a soul. The red heifer is really a symbolic of a Jewish person who wandered off into the world of forbidden pleasure, and now is disconnected. This is this red heifer. And so you're taking it and you're reconnecting it to God. But you're not doing it inside because the person is not present inside. This is not a person who's attending temple services. This is a person who's hanging out in the club. Okay? This person, and from that dark, distant place, they turn to God. They have an awakening and turn to God. Shemaseu b'chutz. Its activities are done way outside. And therefore, it's not just elevating our consciousness to godliness when we have good educators, we're learning in yeshiva, we're learning in a cheder, we have a nice Jewish education, and there too it's a struggle. That's like an animal soul that's brought to the temple. But here we're talking about an animal soul who finds itself in a club, finds itself far away from God. And for it to return, I know in Tshuva, this is the idea of repentance, and that is lahafoch es hayetzahara, to convert the evil inclination, shenafel b'shvira, the evil inclination that has already been corrupted. Like it says in the verse in Shir Hashirim, in the Song of Songs, it says, I find you outside. Who is it referring to? The Koyal Bali Tshuva. It's God saying, when God says, I found you outside, it means I'm finding in general, it's a love song between God and his bride. Bride is Israel. But amongst the Jewish people are those that God finds inside. He comes to temple every day. 3 times a day, it says God comes to prayers. He finds his local Jews that he sees them every day. Once in a while, God is treated with a special treat. Someone who he doesn't find in shul. He finds this person in Vegas or somewhere, whatever. They call you Bali Tshuva. This is finds him in a nightclub. This is referring to a Baal Tshuva, to a penitent that they found outside. And that's the reason you sprinkle the blood. Vesheva azayis. And what they do is they would slaughter it outside of Jerusalem. And then they would take the blood. The Kohen would take the blood and would sprinkle it 7 sprinkles noichach pnei oel moed, towards the entrance of the tent of meeting. This is the first one that was done in the in the tabernacle. It was called the tent of meeting. It was done in the tent. But later, once the temple was transported to Jerusalem, became a permanent home, it was done over there, opposite the Olamod. The blood means, so what are we sprinkling? The animal itself, we're going to deal with soon. The flesh, the meat. We're taking first the blood. The blood is the soul, because we know the soul is in the blood. So the most inner element of the physical dimension of the animal is the blood. So taking the blood and sprinkling it means you're sprinkling the soul of this corrupted soul towards God. What does that mean? It means that no matter how far and corrupted we become, there is a certain sacred spot inside of us that can never become impure. And that sacred spot of our soul, quite on the contrary, the more it is starved, the more it is emaciated, the more it is being blocked, the more intense its burning desire is to be set free, the more in pain it is. And therefore, when there is something in life that kind of shakes the person, and there is that tshuva where the soul suddenly awakens and returns to God, then that's this powerful, that's the sprinkling of the blood. It indicates the powerful yearning of the soul to reconnect to its source from a very, very far place. But that's not it. That's not the whole thing. That's just a moment of the deepest. Now you have to actually take your life itself and turn it around. Your everyday living. So how does that work? And then you have to take the animal itself. And what do? Sreifes apara. Can't take that negative life and bring that and connect God in while one is still sinning. Or while it still has all the negative, impure impulses and desires, then there's still a deep contamination. So the one cannot then yet be attaching his or herself to holiness. You have to start working on yourself to redefine who you are. And the first there is an awakening. And then you slowly but surely start kind of reshaping and that is by burning the cow. And what you're doing is you're burning the shape, as he explained in a moment, you're burning away the shape and the form of the person's previous self, their characteristics, their ambitions, their desires, their entire mindset needs to be burnt without a trace of it, because everything in it was corrupted. What has to happen, but you take the ash. What does that mean? The essence is never bad. For example, the essence of all the passion and desire for sin that was first dominating this person's life, the definition of that desire, the character of the desire, that the person was seeking whatever kind of impure thing, that is unholy. That can never be made holy. But if you break it down to the very nucleus. What's the nucleus? Why is the person sinning? Is because they're seeking something. They're looking, they want a satisfaction. It's just they misinterpreted where to receive that satisfaction, where to receive that bliss. But really, the ultimate bliss you get from God. So when you can burn down everything about it and leave just the essence of the animal drive. What's the essence of the animal drive? It just wants to be attached. That can be elevated. And that's the idea of the ashes of the red heifer. And afterwards you burn the red heifer. So you say afer to make her ash. And just like the wave an analogy, a wood that gets burnt, v'nasa afer, and becomes ash. Afer, the ash, that's the very substance of the piece of wood. But the form gets burnt away. V'tzira eitz, and the form of the branch, is more related to the weaving of the other three elements, the fire, wind, because this is based on the idea that everything in the world is made up of four elements. Every physical object, including a piece of wood. Earth, water, wind, and fire. When you burn something, the water obviously and the wind goes out in the smoke. The fire joins the fire. What's left that doesn't get consumed is the ash, is the earth element, and that's the ash. But But that's the main substance of the physical item. Everything else is more creating the form. But the main substance is the earth. So what that means, therefore, by the red heifer, when you burn it, you're basically destroying the character of the desire. The way the desire of a person shaped itself in life. When we're born, we have a desire. Every human being is born with desire, but depends what you're exposed to. That will develop the shape and the form of to what that desire will gravitate. If you have good teachers and good educators, they'll help you develop those desires to noble things, to good things. Yeah, you live in, if a person is exposed to the wrong things, it can corrupt, or a person can choose to corrupt their desires. But that corruption needs to be erased. But it doesn't mean you destroy the whole thing, because the essence of the desire is actually a good thing. Only you're left with the nucleus, with the very substance of it. So the same as with the evil inclination. The image of the evil desire, that's the desire itself, the sechel and the intelligence, umidos and the emotion shaloi, shekolzeh, all of this by the Baal Tshuva, by the person who lived a corrupted life. All of this tzarich sreifa, all this needs to be burnt. There shouldn't be nothing left of one's previous self. For shvira legamer, it has to be broken completely. For yeshenisha raka efer, and what has to be left over is only the ash. The essence of the power of the longing. Haposhut, it's simple. When it doesn't have any image. This you can convert to holiness. That you should have a powerful thing. And when the animal desire is redeemed from its misguided forms, since it's an animal desire, it's so powerful. And that is the reason why the mitzvah of the red heifer was done by the Elazar, not by Aaron the high priest. It was done by the assistant high priest, second in command. So over here he's going to explain, not so much related to the fact that it needed a second in command, but more because his name was Elazar. Because the name Elazar means divine assistance. Kael Oizer, God who helps. And here's the idea. O Baal Tshuva, someone who's a penitent, someone who's already been corrupted, needs special divine assistance to be able to turn their life around. And God sends that assistance. Anybody who wants to do tshuva, God stretches out their hand, his hand. And that's the idea of Kael Oizer. So to bring the red heifer and to sprinkle its blood, that's the initial excitement. And then to burn up the person's entire, you blow up your entire self, previous self, and then completely disintegrate it till you get down to just the substance and turn that around and make your way back towards holiness and godliness. That is such a monumental task. You need to have Hashem's help. Elazar has to do that. The Isa B'Yalkad Elazar, Kael Ozer. The Midrash says that Elazar stands for Kael Ozer, the God who helps. Because when someone comes to purify, Messiah Loi, the person gets assistance. So regular karbanos, it says, Adam Kiyakriv, the person has to bring himself close. Not necessarily that God is helping. Sure, he doesn't not help, but not such a strong assistance. God wants us to do it ourselves. That's if we're in a good, healthy place. So we have to work hard to get closer. But someone who's not in a healthy place, God will particularly be there to assist that person. In order to go out from impurity tahara to purification, we need a help and assistance from above. The God who helps. It reminds me of dedicating the class to Avi Piamenta, who was a rock star in bars in Tel Aviv. And he and his brother are Bali Tshuva, amazing. And one of the songs that he sings, which is so popular, I remember is Ozreini Kel Chai. Help, assist me. Literally these words, Ozreini Kel. Help me, living God, to do tshuva. Ozreinu Kel Chai. To lachnia Yetzahara, to subdue the Yetzahara. It's a beautiful song, and the Piamentas would sing it. What an amazing Hashgacha Pratis that I am teaching this now, and I wanted to teach this actually early in the morning, and now only after we received this news, I'm teaching this Maayor for my dear friend Avi. And through this incredible avod of the Paraduma, since you're coming from a more distant place, what are you drawing down? You're drawing down B'chinas Mayim Chaim, living waters. So what do you do with the ashes? On top of the ashes, they would take spring water. You couldn't take any other water. It's to be very special water coming directly from a spring and pour it over the ashes. That's the divine reciprocation to this tshuva. You should bring living waters. So what is that? Remember we said earlier that through all the mitzvahs we do, we activate and we pump the energies of Chachma. But there is Chachma. Chachma is called water. Meha Chachma, waters of Chachma. There is water, and there is water coming from Fiji water coming directly from the spring, which is a much higher level of water, which in general means the Chachma in its highest place, which is going to explain the Esespheres Hagnuzais. From that level is where you're pumping. And in there itself, you're hitting the higher level, not just the Reuven, not just the mark that's in the Esespheres Hagnuzais, but you're hitting not just the mark that from the Orin Sof, from the higher level of the Orin Sof that's embedded in the Esespheres Hagnuzais, but the Orin Sof that's totally above the Esespheres Hagnuzais, from there you're drawing. It's what he's going to develop over here. Maayon B'chinas Chachma, or Maayon Chaim, and living water is B'chinas Makar HaChachma, the source of Chachma. The Chachma, when it is all the way in its origins in the 10 hidden spheres, before the contraction. That the Chachma itself is in such a high level there, in essence. It also has the light. Remember, we say the light of Chachma, when it's still included in the 10 spheres, even the level of Orin Sof that we called Orin Sof B, but even on that level, it already is. Since it's all 10 together, it's got an extra powerful light. The great light that rises above them all. Perek that we learned in chapter 27, how high that is. We can even say, even deeper, we reach for the essence of the Orin Sof, that is infinite, that is higher than the root of where the lights come. Because the roots of the lights are from the Esespheres Hagnuzais. That's the root of the Or Pnimi. But this is even higher. This is reaching into the Or Makif, into the pure Orin Sof. Or Makayra and Arishan, even higher than their first Makar, their first source. Now we understand why in Paraduma it says 2 times Havaya. Because the Beis Shemes Havaya Yadua, the 2 names of Havaya are known. I'm going to make the class a little bit longer because I just want to finish the 15th class. I want to finish the discourse. So it's going to be just like maybe 37 minutes instead of 30 minutes. So give me another 5 minutes. Now he's going to address why it says 2 times Yud Kei Vav Kei, because we know that in God's name is mentioned twice. In the Torah, in the 13 attributes of mercy, and the traduction of that, it says Vayikra Hashem Hashem, 2 times Havaya. So the Zohar says there's Havaya D'Liela, there's the higher Havaya, and there's the Havaya D'Latat. What's the difference between the two? It says the lower Havaya is the Yud Kei Vav Kei as it manifests as open Sfirot, the Sfirot in Atzilus, when they're already fully revealed, 10 Sfirot. The Havaya D'Liela is the Eser Sfiros when they're still embedded in the Orin Sof, the Eser Sfiros Hagnuzais. And that's really what, so therefore, usually this higher level of Havaya is not in Torah and Mitzvahs, we're mainly revealing the lower Havaya. But in Tshuva, in the red heifer, we're tapping the higher Havaya. So that's the meaning of it. Vaidaber Havaya. Who is speaking? The initial time Havaya that's speaking, that's the lower Havaya. That's the Havaya that's communicating with Moshe. That's where God is already revealing himself in a persona of 10 spheros, in a revealed persona of a human of 10 spheros. And what is he saying? Zos Chukas Torah. This is the statute of the Torah. Ashet Tziva Havaya, that the higher Havaya is, Tziva is commanding, but over here it means is connecting. In other words, you're pulling me from my quintessential origins. That's the point. One is the more expressed Havaya. That's above the order of evolution. But through the red heifer, we drew up Havaya D'Liela. We pull from Havaya D'Liela, that's above Ishtalshus. We can say, this is the root of the lights, that is before the Tzimtzum, so high. We can say even deeper, that the first Havaya is not the 10 spheros that are hidden in the Or Ein Sof, but really the Or Ein Sof itself. V'gam yesh lomar shezeh b'chinas atzmas Or Ein Sof habli gvul sheirish b'chinas sof of kalalman, which is the root of, not of the internal lights, but is the root of the surrounding lights. Commission is Baal El Perek Tezayin, the Beis HaShemois, that the Tuz HaShemois, chapter 16, and Sharshei HaBeis Madreges, the Mamala Kalalman, the Save of Kalalman. This is the root of the two. This is when God is speaking to Moshe. And Shem Havaya Deshtalshel is the lower Shem Havaya. He's the lower tetragrammaton. What is he saying? So is Chukas HaTorah. This is that one mitzvah of the Torah, the mitzvah of tshuva, the mitzvah Ashatziva Havaya, that over here we are connecting to the higher Havaya, who Havaya Shalom Eilam Eshtalshlos, that is above the entire Shtalshlos, Shemam Shichem Adei Paraduma, that we draw down through the red heifer, the Masel B'chutz, whose actions are done outside, Dafka, Shu'inyan Tshuva, which is the idea of Tshuva, Lotzeis Ma'atuma, to run away, to go out from the impurity, Ela Tahara, to purity, and on this particular we need help. Elazar does it. Kael Ozer, the God who helps. And through this we draw Mayim Chayim, living waters, the source of wisdom, the revelation of the essence of the Or Ein Sof, that is infinite. And with this we concluded chapter 28. Wow, Koach, ultimate Koach. All right, everyone should have a wonderful Shabbos and Aliyas Neshama for Avi.